Good morning from the UK. Good afternoon to those of you in Malaysia. We're here today to talk about somewhere which doesn't get a lot of focus in Western Europe, Labuan International Business Financial Centre. I'm very pleased that we have today with us Farah. Farah and I first were in contact, I guess, a little bit over a year ago, when Farah got in touch with us and say, hey, we've got some ideas about them, thinking we might want to do together. And it's been a pleasure to get to know Farah and Labuan over the time. So we're going to hear from Farah today a bit about Labuan and recent developments there. And as usual, we'll have an opportunity for questions towards the end of the session. For those of you who have not used the GoToWebinar application before, the way to pose a question is to type it into your screen. On the dashboard, you'll see on the screen there is a question box. You put the questions in there, and we'll bring those together and moderate them towards the end of the session. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Mike Wardle, Head of Indices at ZN. And our focus in the work we do on indices is very much on financial centres across the world. So we're always interested to hear about what's going on in financial centres and what the news is that should be relevant to all of us who are interested in how to do business and where to do business, which is really the focus. So in terms of the agenda, just a few remarks from me, which is where we are. Farah will give an overview of Labuan as an international financial centre. We've got a bit of time for Q&A, and we'll finish by 1:45. And so without any further time from me, because my job really is to get out of Farah's way, I'd like to move on to introduce Farah, Chief Executive Officer of Labuan IBFC Inc. Farah, over to you. Really looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you very much. And yes, it's been a year since we started to get to know each other. And I think there was a very clear meeting of minds when we did, which is great. And thank you for the opportunity to really bring some light and shed some light into Labuan and what we're doing. But before we go there, I just wanted to highlight a little bit about who we are at Labuan IBFC Incorporated. So we're the non-commercial market development entity for the jurisdiction, Labuan International Business and Financial Centre. We've been around about 12 years now. We started in 2008 as an independent entity. And I guess we've developed with the jurisdiction, and the jurisdiction has been in existence for about 30 years. So maybe if we can go through the first slide, which talks really about where are we, right? So we are part of Malaysia, Borneo, Malaysia, really. So Malaysia is divided into Peninsular Malaysia and Borneo, Malaysia, and we are an island of Borneo, Malaysia. So it's part of Malaysia, a federal territory under the federal government of Malaysia, off the coast of Sabah. We have about 100,000 people in Labuan. Those of you who are keen, World War II, those of you who know history, basically, in World War II, you know that Labuan was a very, very important port of defense. And really what has happened is that we've got a massive FCO cemetery in Labuan, commemorating the heroes that really fought the war for us. And it's always been actually a key port of call in one way, shape, or form. And just a bit of trivia, the word Labuan and the name Labuan actually comes from the root Malay word, which is Labuhan. And Labuhan means port. It is Asia's deepest natural port. And with the discovery of oil off the coast of Borneo, it has become a key oil and gas servicing depot. So yeah, we have economic drivers. We have obviously the International Business and Financial Centre, which we'll talk about a little bit, logistics, tourism, oil and gas, retail trading. So key takeaways from this is that we're part of Malaysia. We are essentially one country, two systems, right? The Labuan system, the Labuan Financial System, and the onshore Malaysian system. So if you look at Labuan and if you look at the cloud of laws that govern the financial system, kind of hovering over the island, that's the best way of looking at it. And we're obviously strategically located. I mean, 6 hours out of Asia, any main area within Asia. Next, please. So as I said earlier, we've been around for 30 years. We like to think that, you know, we are your corporate home away from home. And a lot of the questions that I get asked actually is, why? Why would Malaysia set up a center in IFC or IBFC, when, you know, we obviously have an onshore system ourselves? And, you know, I'd like to take you back 30 years ago from when Malaysia was growing rapidly. We are still growing, obviously, but at a more keener tick, I guess, maybe a more consistent level. But 30 years ago, we were growing leaps and bounds. And Malaysian grown companies, homegrown companies, were looking at expanding outside Malaysia. And at the same time, there was this island that needed a boost, as it were, economically. And what happened was that the government of Malaysia, under the Ministry of Finance, decided that they would set up a center which will facilitate Malaysian businesses going out. And that's why Labuan's profile over the years has morphed. We've morphed from being a very domestic-centric facilitator of intermediation to a more regional, to having a more regional role. So we started as an IFC in 1990. It's obviously tax efficient. It's substance enabling, and we like to call ourselves midshore. And there's a slide later where I talk us through this concept of midshore, as it were, as opposed to offshore, onshore. Why midshore? But really, the idea is for us to facilitate business, trading, investments through financial services. I was invited once to my 9-year-old's show and tell, what do your parents do? And I had to explain offshore centers, midshore centers to a bunch of, I think 7, it was year 2, I think. And the best way I could describe it was the plumbing of international finance. So really, if you look at it as the Intel inside the computer, that's what we do. And we like to think we do it for Asia, not just for Malaysia, but really for Asia and for non-Asians that are looking to have an Asian home. I mean, at the end of the day, we are, COVID aside and this hiccup along the way, we are in the Asian century. Asia is the growth engine of the world. And in order to grow, you have to be in Asia. And we like to think that it's important for anyone who is interested in Asia to consider Labuan as a home. So well-balanced legal and regulatory framework, proportionality. I think one of the key things is that because we're a wholesale center, we're able to take a very proportionate role in a proportionate stance in how we intermediate, right? So we have robust governing legislations passed by the Malaysian government, passed by the Malaysian Parliament, administered by the Labuan Financial Services Authority, a statutory body that is under the Ministry of Finance of Malaysia. So if you look at it, what you have is a jurisdiction that reports directly to the Ministry of Finance of Malaysia. And this statutory body executes its role within the acts that are passed by the Malaysian Parliament. All provisions are perpetual in nature and not time-bound, right? For as long as the acts remain acts passed by the Malaysian Parliament, they will be enforceable. And the reason I like to highlight this is because a lot of other jurisdictions are seen as SEZs. They are special economic zones, and they sometimes can be time-bound. So for us, we're not time-bound. For as long as the acts remain legal, the center remains as it is. Yeah. The other thing I'd like to highlight is AMLA, the anti-money laundering provisions and the counter-terrorism financing provisions. There is absolutely no arbitrage between the Malaysian onshore regime for anti-money laundering and CFT and Labuan's regime. Yeah, we are tax, currency, and legally agnostic. So for all intents and purposes, you could trade in sterling, and adhere to British law or the law of any country for as long as contracting parties agree, and they will be honored in Labuan. So really what you have is a very agnostic jurisdiction. You have an agnostic jurisdiction and a facilitative jurisdiction in a well-regulated environment. And I really like to highlight this aspect. It's extremely important in the sense that in a lot of instances, what we have and how we try to explain it is that there is a natural tension between, as a jurisdiction, what we'd like to do and what the Malaysian Ministry of Finance and the peer reviews and the standard setting bodies will allow us to. Because we're part of Malaysia, we need to adhere to the rules that Malaysia has adhered to. So really how we like to think we compete is through our facilitative nature, our regulatory stance, and the fact that we allow a wide range of structures and solutions. And maybe I can explain that a little bit better with the next slide. The next slide details actually the acts. So here you have how we are internationally recognized. So we are whitelisted by EU. We are largely compliant by the OECD. We've been assessed by the APG, GIIS, the IFSB. So we adhere to all the international standards, right? We adhere to all the international standards that any jurisdiction, whether it be offshore, onshore, any jurisdiction, any financial jurisdiction, will adhere to the same standards that Labuan does, yeah? And in those hexagons that you have there on the slide, what you have are all the different acts of parliament that actually create the structures, the solutions, the regulatory body, the supervisory role that is required to run a jurisdiction. So you have here the Labuan Financial Services Authority Act, and that really creates the regulator. The Financial Services and Securities Act, that creates all the structures and solutions that we have, everything from banking to insurance to leasing to money broking, everything. And what is unique, obviously, being part of Malaysia is our focus on Islamic financial services as well. So we have the Islamic Financial Services and Securities Act, and that's an omnibus legislation. And we like to think that it's the only omnibus legislation globally that mirrors all the provisions of the conventional act, yeah? Then we have the Companies Act that really creates the IBCs that we have, the partnerships, the protected cell companies, and then we have your limited partnership and limited liability partnership act, the Business Activity Tax Act. Now that is the act that provides for the fiscal regime that all entities adhere to. We have foundations in Labuan, whether you have it for wealth management or whether you have it for other reasons, it's all provided for there. And we have the Trust Act. And again, all legislation is passed by the Malaysian Parliament, and we adhere to international standards. So next slide, please. So really, if you look at those acts of parliaments, those little hexagons, what it creates is this. It creates the entire ecosystem of structures and solutions that are available for businesses and high net worth individuals to use. So companies, banking, insurance, leasing, trust companies, wealth management, capital markets provisions, digital markets, and commodity trading. So I'd like to take us through each and every box very quickly. We don't have very many companies in Labuan. You know, we don't run into the hundreds and thousands. In fact, we don't even reach 50,000 companies. The setting up of companies has never been a focus for us. Yeah. We see the companies as a corporate structure that houses the business that we are after. So at the moment in Labuan, we have, as of first half, and these are numbers I managed to dig out because the numbers are still not officially available, but I'm happy to share them here with you. We have about 17,000 companies in Labuan at the moment. Yeah, this is as of first half of 2020, and that's fine for us. Yeah, that's absolutely fine, because the companies are seen as a conduit for business. They are not a business for us, right? So that's fundamental in the way we're different, maybe, from bog standard jurisdictions. Banking. So we have commercial banking, investment banking, and as the first half of the year, we now have 60 banks in Labuan. Banking has always been a key business for Labuan. It started out, if you go back to how we started in 1990, we started with a lot of Malaysian banks. Malaysian banks were looking to explore ASEAN, and they needed agnostic jurisdiction. So we started out housing and being home to a lot of Malaysian banks looking for booking center, using Labuan as a regional booking center. Since then, our profile has changed. And really, if you look at the assets under management, if you look at the loan books and the businesses, majority of business going through the banking system in Labuan is now no longer Malaysian, out of the 60 banks. Yeah. One of the things that we're also proud of is we licensed last year our first digital bank, and that is the China Construction Bank. What was interesting is that obviously Malaysia and China have had a very long-standing relationship. Malaysia was the first ASEAN country to set up diplomatic ties with China in 1967. And when China Construction Bank was looking for a regional home outside of China to book a lot of their loans as part of the Belt and Road Initiative, they chose Labuan. So Labuan has the balance sheet of China Construction Bank out of Beijing, and we're facilitating all the BRI loans and investments into ASEAN via this bank. So we're quite proud of that in the role that we play. Having said that, we also have conventional banks. We have investment banks in Labuan. And the other thing that's really important for everyone to understand is that we only accept business or transactions that are already within the banking system, right? So all deposit taking already has to be within the banking system. We don't take over-the-counter cash. We adhere to international standards. So because of that, our banking system has been quite sturdy, I guess, quite strong through the years. Insurance. Now, insurance and reinsurance is another key area. We are home to almost 220 license holders. Again, it started out being very Malaysian-centric, but over the last 10 years, we are now very much regional in the kind of risk that we intermediate via Labuan. And this ranges from direct insurance, reinsurance, insurance broking, self-insurance via captive is something that we seem to be growing in, and we're happy to facilitate very much. We're very happy to facilitate. Again, it's about the structures. It's about the legal provisions that those acts provide and how we have managed to find our niche within the region. Leasing, again, is key for Labuan, and these are big ticket items, the aircrafts, the engines. We've seen a growth here because of the oil and gas growth as well. So those huge FSOBs, I think they're called, and the rigs. They are all leased via Labuan. Trust companies. Now, trust companies are really company secretaries that offer Labuan. When I first started working in Labuan for Labuan IBFC in 2008, we had 24. Today, we have 62 trust companies or company secretaries. That just goes to show you how we have grown. And we would like to think that our range of trust companies has increased. The areas that they provide, our channels provide, our partners provide, the scope, the geographic scope has also increased. Now, wealth management, we have had trusts. So we have special trusts, purpose trusts, but we're also home to Asia's only private client foundation. And that is something that has grown. We're home now to about 200 of these structures from Malaysia, but also non-Malaysian. And family offices, private trust companies are also available. Capital markets, obviously, funds are a big thing in Labuan. Fund management, fund administration, and exchanges. We've got 3 digital exchanges in Labuan, and we are looking forward to see those grow. And that segues nicely to our digital market. So when we say digital, we mean everything DLT. And really the ethos here is very similar to our Islamic ethos. We're able to, what we've done is we've accepted that actually DLT or distributed ledger technology is a way of doing business. And so all our licenses are able to be applied. I guess you are able to apply for a license, a digital license, for as long as there's a conventional legacy license already in existence. What the regulator will look at is the business process and the check and balances to ensure that the business is run in a manner that is, I guess, we are able to supervise and that is robust. Commodity trading is also a key area for us, but that's very much, again, fitted into the oil and gas segment that we're after. Next slide, please. So the tax structure. Let's talk a little bit about tax. And I think, you know, when we talk about tax, it would be silly of us not to recognize, I think, the changes. I mean, the phenomenal changes in the last, 10 years or so in this area of tax. I mean, tax changes quite slowly. But having said that, in the last 10 years, the change in the philosophy, the idea of equitable tax, the idea of creating substance within a jurisdiction is phenomenal. I mean, I think the OECD has just launched a consultation on BEPS 2.0, and so it keeps morphing. It's ever changing. But what's important to understand is that our tax structure is extremely simple. So there is a 3% tax on net audited profit. Non-trading income attracts no tax. And how we are quite unique is that we have very clear and prescribed substance requirements. So what we did, I think, you know, if you throw yourself back maybe a couple of years or so, all the jurisdictions were looking at how to adhere to minor matter substance, economic substance. And what we've done in Labuan together with the inland revenue of Malaysia, now that's the other thing that I should have maybe mentioned earlier, is that actually there are 2 competent authorities in Labuan. First is Labuan Financial Services Authority, and they are, you know, obviously the regulator for all things Labuan. The other competent authority is the Malaysian Revenue. Now, the Malaysian HRMC, as it were, is the competent authority for all things tax in Labuan, right? So HRMC Malaysia, Inland Revenue Malaysia, and Labuan FSA, together with the Ministry of Finance, came together. So this tripartite grouping, as it were, came together and decided that the best way forward for Labuan was to be very clear with regards to what we require vis-a-vis substance. So we have clear prescribed substance requirements based on each license category. Now, again, these substance requirements passed by the Malaysian government and signed off as a gazette. So there is no ambiguity whatsoever with regards to what's required, and I'll dive a little bit deeper into that because that's quite different from other jurisdictions, right? The other thing that's interesting is that in certain jurisdictions, it's important to have an election. So sometimes what's important is the structure, not the tax. Sometimes what's important is that legally you're able to structure a particular business in Labuan, and really you're not after a preferential tax regime. You would like to pay a higher tax bracket, and that's where the flexibility of Labuan kicks in, because you have an option to pay the Malaysian tax rate of 24%. Right now, I know that it seems a little bit maybe oxymoronic to think about it, but you'll be surprised at the number of people that take this option. A number of entities that actually prefer to pay a higher tax rate at 24%. But what's important to remember, I guess, is that flexibility is available when and if needed, right? So there's no withholding taxes on dividends, interest, royalties, service fees, lease payment. There's no stamp duty. And the beauty is you have access to the Malaysian Double Taxation Agreement Network. So Malaysia has as a trading nation and as a very long-standing trading nation, we have about almost 80 double taxation agreements, and treaty benefits can be offered to a Labuan company. Okay, so Labuan companies enjoy the benefit from the Malaysian DTA network. And if it's important, there is access to reside in Malaysia. And all these provisions are enshrined in the Labuan Business Activity Tax Act 1990. And really, we don't see tax as the thing you would use Labuan for. It is important, no doubt. But in a lot of instances, it's really the structures and the solutions, the proportionality in regulation and the ability to be located within Asia, and the cost efficiency of that, which attracts a lot of people to Labuan. Next slide, please. Thank you, Mike. So let's talk about substance, right? Substance is used in, assessing cross-border tax situation that calls into question really the level of operational activity and decision-making process, mind and matter, that is conducted within a jurisdiction, right? So if you say you are using a structure or you have an entity within a jurisdiction, show us. Prove to us that you are in that jurisdiction. Prove to the revenue that you are in that jurisdiction, right? So the entity is required to demonstrate it has a functional structure within that jurisdiction. And really for us, it's not been a situation where we've had to go from 0 to 10. Because really in Labuan, you've always really had to have your board meetings in Labuan or in Malaysia, whether it be in Labuan or Kuala Lumpur, or in, bank account ideally in Labuan. So really those were already, those requirements were already more or less in place even before these changes. But what these changes have brought is a more detailed prescribed nature of substance, yeah? So aside from mine management and control, there's also requirements to have prescribed number of full-time employees and annual operating expenditure in Labuan, right? This approach has created tax and operational certainty. And I think, in this age that we're in, and I hate to use the C word, certainty and clarity and understanding really where you are in trying to assess and move forward operationally is worth its weight in gold. And we like to think that that's what we offer, yeah? Because these requirements are enshrined in a gazette and it is very clearly defined. So for example, a Labuan IBC, a Labuan trading company, a minimum substance requirement is 2 full-time employees and a minimum spend of Malaysian 50. Now, a minimum spend of 50,000 Malaysian ringgits is about 12,000 US dollars. Okay. Or for a bank or an insurance entity, the minimum requirement for substance is really 2 full-time to 4 full-time employees. And the spend is about 100,000 ringgit to 200,000 ringgit. So with this kind of clear requirements in Malaysian ringgit, what you have is a very convenient, cost-efficient, clear jurisdiction where you are able to then create, because at the end of the day, it's the business is the business. This is, what you have within an IFC is really just to facilitate that business. And you want clarity within that layer of facilitation. And that's really what we are trying to offer. Yeah. We can talk a little bit about substance in the Q&A, but maybe we'll go to the next slide, please. So why Labuan IBFC, right? So we are strategically located. We are 6 hours from Beijing, 6 hours from Dubai. If you are within that greater Asia region, what you need is a jurisdiction that you can get to. And we like to think that you're able to get to us, yeah, within that 6 hours. robust, well-regulated jurisdiction, again, adhering to international standards and best practices, whitelisted by the EU, part of Malaysia, assessed by the European Union via its assessment of Malaysia. So when peer review comes in and where the assessors come in, they assess Malaysia as a whole, and as part of that assessment is their assessment of Labuan. So you can imagine that it's so important for us to ensure that we are up to scratch in order not to bring down the Malaysian assessment, right? That is key. That is key. So the Labuan regime has been classified as non-harmful by the OECD. It's legislated by a common law framework. So really, you know, we are part of the Commonwealth. Malaysia is part of the Commonwealth, and we're legislated in our legal structure is the common law structure. We offer a comprehensive suite of legislation. Sorry, there's a flicker here that's kind of annoying me a little bit, and I'm sure annoying you. So please excuse us. So create a bespoke solutions for business and growth. Really, you know, I think this aspect of it cannot be underrated, right? The fact that we're facilitative, the fact that you can come to us as a non-commercial entity and say, listen, Farah, we're thinking of this. How is this going to fit within the jurisdiction, right? And really, that's the beauty of it. As a wholesale center, as a wholesale intermediation center, the ability to sit and have a discussion, an open discussion, and then after that to go forward and discuss it with the regulator vis-a-vis the viability of an application, that provides comfort, right? And that's what we like to think, how we have been quite unique in our offering. Currency neutrality, as I said earlier, no problem. You can have any currency operate within Labuan. You can adhere to the UK common law. You can adhere to any civil law jurisdiction as well. So contractually, you can choose your legal provisions. You can even also arbitrate. You can choose your commercial courts. So, for example, we've had structures that have been that have gone to the Singapore commercial courts. The arbitration center in the Middle East, in the UK. So in that sense, really what you're able to do is take our bespoke structure and create a unique operating regime within that bespoke structure in order to fit what you need, yeah? So tax efficiency, access to Malaysian double taxation agreements, which I mentioned earlier, cost effective, clarity on substance, clarity on tax, workforce. Now, I think when you look at Asia, when you look at a relatively highly educated workforce that's proficient in English, that's able to speak decent Mandarin, that's able to understand and basically you have a very high level of qualification from get-go, from secondary onwards. Malaysia is one of those few countries where you are able to hire well, yeah. And in Labuan, we actually have a university that feeds into the IFC. So we have an offshore syllabus that we offer. We have obviously accounting and business management and an IFC school within Labuan itself. So you've got that talent pipeline coming in into Labuan. So that's something that's quite important, we feel, especially in this area, in the era of substance, right? So work permits, you're able to live if you so choose. And Labuan companies are recognized for listing as listing vehicles. In fact, Labuan foundations are also recognized as listing orphan vehicles to be listed in quite a few exchanges. So really, I'm happy to take any questions that you have. I believe that's the last slide. I believe that is the last slide that we have, Mike. And I'm happy to take any questions or have a chat with regards to how we've grown and what is our value prop. Thank you, Mike.
Well, thank you so much, Farah. It's really, really good tour of the Labuan landscape. Maybe we should have some pictures up on the website as well of what Labuan actually looks like. which was
it is quite pretty.
Yeah, I've seen some of the photos. It is a very lovely place. So we move into time for questions. I've got a question for myself, if I may. And I know you managed to avoid mentioning the C word, but I'm going to. Just to ask what effects the pandemic and COVID-19 has had on Labuan. It's the question I get into conversation with a lot of people across the world at the moment. But it'd be really interesting to have your take on how Labuan's fared in this time of change.
Yeah, so it's quite ironic in a way, actually, because this year is our 30th year and we had so much planned. So many different things we had planned. In fact, we really wanted to go out into Europe this year because we felt that, as we grow as a jurisdiction and as European businesses really quite aggressively start coming out, and especially businesses from the UK with Brexit start coming out into Asia, Labuan might be an interesting option for them. But all that obviously has been put on hold. We have had to rethink our proposition. We have had to come up with regulatory relaxations like all the other jurisdictions have had to, and that's fine. But really, we have been extremely robust in how we have been able to weather this storm. So, we thought that going into the first quarter, we were going to suffer with regards to new incorporations and licenses. But, I did a bit of digging before our webinar today, and actually, I am surprised, right? So we've had, let me see now, we've had growth of we have about 800, 900 licensed entities in Labuan. So this doesn't include your box standard IBCs or partnerships or the rest of it. These are licensed financial entities, yeah? We have about 800, 900 of them. And of this, the first half of this year, we've grown 50%, Mike. Okay. So I think, there's a lot to be said about the pandemic and the deep economic slowdown that we're all experiencing. But having said that, I think a lot of it is also forward planning and historical pipeline, right? So I think historically, we've had pipeline coming on board. This is not, and I keep saying this to the team as well. We're not selling shampoo. This is not FMCG. A lot of what we're seeing here is based on decisions that were probably made in the third quarter, fourth quarter last year, and have flowed through into first half this year. But having said that, I don't want to dilute the fact that actually some of it is also based on future planning, right? So having grown, we have licensed and we've approved about 60 new licenses in the first half of this year. And we have the same number in the pipeline. So that's quite phenomenal. Key areas are insurance. So we had 6 new banks licensed this year, 12 new insurance entities licensed this year. Leasing has grown. We've also grown, with the ethos that we have with vis-a-vis digital. We've also grown in that digital space. So, for example, we've got crypto exchanges, we've got digital asset exchanges. But with regards to box standard IBCs, we have had a decline, right? Okay. So those are more, seasonal, as it were, if there's such a word, seasonal. And so we've seen a decline there. But with regards to licenses approved, we've seen decent growth. And in wealth management, we've seen a decent growth as well. So we've had growth in foundations and PTCs. So COVID has been challenging. I kid you not, it's been very challenging for all of us, right? And continues to be challenging. I mean, I think, we were discussing this earlier about how we're coming into the end of the year. And maybe a lot of us, I know I myself was thinking that maybe, we'll come to a landing. I think psychologically we're all really trying to accept that we may not come to a landing at the end of the year, and moving forward, what it's going to look like. But so far, so good. And we hope for growth. We don't hope for stellar growth. For as long as there's growth and there is recognition of the jurisdiction as being robust and strong, we'll be very pleased, Mike.
Thank you very much. We've got a few questions coming through. Bob McDowell, who's in the Channel Islands, has asked about skills, saying with Labuan, with a population of 100,000, how do you import the skills you need to support the facilitation of offshore midshore business? So you mentioned the training that you do through universities actually in Labuan, but what's the mix of people coming into Labuan to work?
So most of them. Most of them are Malaysians. Most of them are not Labuanites, as it were. So there are two aspects to this answer, actually. First is the fact that Labuan is an island off Borneo, right? And there is on a 20-minute flight from there, this beautiful, more beautiful than I have to say sometimes, Kota Kinabalu. And there is a huge population there. And a lot of them come from Kota Kinabalu. So a lot of the skills that we need come from Kota Kinabalu. A lot of it comes from KL. Having said that, there is also the opportunity to have your staff in Kuala Lumpur. So the insurance, for example, the insurance industry has this allowance where they are able to be co-located in Labuan and in Kuala Lumpur. So you have to be in Labuan. The substance has to be in Labuan. You have to show that mind and matter, management, mind matter, all in Labuan. But you can also then be located anywhere in Malaysia. And I think that's the beauty of it, right? So when you look at Labuan as an offering, you need to look at it as a Malaysian offering. And when I say Malaysia, the greater Malaysia. So you could, for all instance and for all intents and purposes, be in Penang, be, in Langkawi, have a Labuan entity, have a Labuan presence, yes. Make your decisions in Labuan, but live in Malaysia, right? And I think you cannot underestimate the benefit of that. So yes, skills, we have to bring in skills, but we have, I guess, we have the manpower within Malaysia, right? The greater Malaysia to bring it in.
Yep, that's very clear, and I think it's part of being a midshore centre. It's actually sort of that link into the main economy.
Absolutely.
Question from Adrian Guttridge. You say, is there a minimum investment required to set up a company within Labuan? We've already talked about the substantive requirements, but is there a minimum investment requirement?
The minimum investment requirement would depend on the business plan. So if Adrian's talking about a box standard company, an IBC, it would depend on what that company would be doing. So, it requires a business plan. As I say, again, this is about being midshore. So for example, right, box standard, I shouldn't say that, but by and large, offshore companies, you're able to buy off-the-shelf offshore companies, right? You're not able to do that in Labuan. You have to go to your company secretary with a business plan and idea of what that company is going to operate in, how that company is going to operate, what is going to be the key areas of growth. And based on that, then you put the capital in, whether it be authorized or paid out, and then you put it in. So it's not as simple as, I guess, other offshore centers. And it used to be, actually, to be honest with you, a big disadvantage. A Labuan company used to not be able to sell because it would, number one, be too cumbersome. Number two, be too expensive because it's cumbersome. But with the leveling of the playing field, with this flight to quality within jurisdictions, what we've seen is there is a natural landing for a Labuan offering.
Thank you very much. We've got a really direct question from Mark Abel about working in Labuan. He's actually planning to set up a corporate treasury company in Labuan. has an incorporation consultant in Malaysia advising it's not possible to open a company bank account that has internet banking. This may be a very detailed question, but the heart of the question is it true that internet banking isn't available in Labuan? I think Mark may need to be in touch with you separately to go into the detail.
No, and Mark is absolutely right. Okay, so until very recently, internet banking was not available in Labuan because a lot of the banks in Labuan are corporate banks. So a lot of it was always ever done within the system, within the bank-to-bank system. Okay, I know for a fact that Citibank, HSBC, and a couple of other banks have now introduced online banking. What is also, and it's a perennial issue which has gotten worse, if there's such a thing, right? Banking. Opening of bank accounts was bad before COVID. It's impossible now. And what has happened is that you're able to actually bank outside Labuan after you've exhausted and evidence that you've exhausted all the banks in Labuan. So there are a lot of Labuan entities that actually use onshore Malaysian banks, but in non-Malaysian ringgit denominated accounts. Okay? And they offer internet banking.
Okay. If I might, I might put Mark in touch with you to discuss any particular issues that he has.
Yes, please.
And Mark will make sure that link's made. We are running short of time, and we have a few more questions to get through, if that's okay. A question again from Bob McDowell: to what extent you compete or collaborate with Kuala Lumpur in terms of financial centre? What's the relationship?
This is my personal take. Yeah, let me just caveat that. I would like to think that the Malaysian Ministry of Finance looks at Labuan for certain developmental areas. And I'll give you an example. Islamic finance. The world's first sukuk was structured out of Labuan. And then we started this idea of Islamic windows, Islamic banking, Islamic leasing. And then as it grew, what the government did was they took it onshore. Right? So what you have within Labuan, and it's used quite strategically, I'd like to think, is that it's kind of like a test bed to see if it works. And then it gets brought onshore. Right? So we don't compete with onshore Malaysia because onshore Malaysia jurisdictionally is limited to Malaysians. Right? And Malaysian related entities within the borders, as it were. By definition, an IFC is the complete opposite. So we don't compete, we complement, right? We complement Malaysia onshore, and we do, and this is the thinking, right? And this is why when a lot of people ask me, why would Malaysia have Labuan? It doesn't make any sense. It does, because what you have with Labuan is this opportunity to develop a USP, a unique selling proposition, or a little niche, and then see if it will wash onshore nationally. So no, we don't compete, we complement, and we think that's the natural way of being.
Thank you very much. We really are over time now. We have a question from Ahmed Farah. It's about the tax law between holding companies and subsidiaries, and where the tax on dividend income on the holding company is, and whether there's going to be future improvements. I don't know whether there's a quick answer to that, or whether it's more for a conversation between you and Ahmed, offline, as it were. But there's obviously something that's interesting about dividends for holding companies. Are you aware of this?
The flow through of dividends. Yes, I think I'm not a tax expert. And again, I dare not answer that question almost, because it might be held against me. Generally, dividends are not taxable as they flow up. I think Farah's question is a little bit more detailed, and I'm happy, and I know Farah very well, and I'm happy to take it offline with him.
That's super. I'll make sure that question is with you in detail. Well, everybody, we've had a fascinating insight into Labuan and where it's developed, where it's going. And thank you very much indeed, Farah, for giving us your time and your insight. It's been very interesting. Those of you who want to be in touch at all with Labuan International Finance Centre, we'll make sure that when we send out the follow-up email to this, we include some contact details for us, so you can follow up and find out more if you wish. I should really finish by saying thank you to our sponsors at the FS Club. They do allow us to range widely across the world and across areas of interest, across technology, innovation, and finance. And we're really very grateful to those who work with us to make all this possible. And of course, thank you very much for your attention today and for your interest. So it just remains for me, in the absence of a live audience, to offer Farah this enormous round of applause, which I'm sure is being echoed in the rooms that everyone is coming from, who is sharing with us today. And just to finish, I said in the questions we've had a comment to say, please thank Farah for an informative and interesting session. It's been fascinating for one of the audience members, and to say thank you to Farah again, and thank you all for your attendance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and please stay safe.
Thank you. We'll see you soon. Bye bye.